Well, good evening and welcome back to another segment of Say That Again. This is our midweek discussion where we look back on what we talked about on Sunday through our time in the Word and worship, and we just take it to the next step. We say, how can we apply it to our everyday lives? We've had so much fun getting to discuss as a staff, and now we are looking forward to this new shift because we're going to continue talking about what we talked on Sunday, but it's different because we launched a new sermon series this past week called Better. I'm Audra, the Missions and Ministry Coordinator, and I'm going to be leading tonight. I've got Pastor Bo with me. We're going to be discussing Better, and the key focus for this was the word thankful. Now, obviously, that's going in line with the season of life we're in right now. We're in November, so we're in that Thanksgiving season. There are a lot of people who may have already skipped Thanksgiving. Are you someone who normally skips Thanksgiving, goes straight to Christmas?
Oh, no.
You focus on,
yeah. Like, what do you even mean for skipping Thanksgiving?
Exactly. I know people who are already have all their Christmas things out and they're celebrating that over Thanksgiving. I fully believe we need to go with Thanksgiving first.
Well, I mean, Thanksgiving doesn't have specific decorations necessarily, so you can still get started with Christmas decor and still celebrate Thanksgiving.
All right, you have a point.
Give some people some props that are doing it around here, right?
And I do understand.
I mean, if there was Thanksgiving music or Thanksgiving decorations, then we'd be in a whole different category.
I guess so. Well, this series is going to be focusing on how we as believers can live that better life that we're all looking for. And like I said, Thanksgiving, so we're starting off with the word thankful. So I have kind of a fun question to get us going. What is one Thanksgiving tradition that you love, maybe you grew up with, or it's one that you engage in now, and how does it affect your attitude towards being thankful?
Yeah, well, for us, at least for my immediate family on my side, not my wife's side, Thanksgiving has basically turned into a family reunion. So it's the only time of year really that I see the majority of my extended family. And my dad's mom and her sister grew up living side by side. So my dad's cousins are basically some of his best friends in life. And so for us, those children and now their children and our children are all typically gathered. Last year, of course, being somewhat difficult, we had one of the patriarchs of that family die of COVID, so it really changed the holidays for us in a lot of ways. We weren't able to gather, so we are all looking forward to being able to gather again this Thanksgiving and be able to see everybody. What was interesting, I actually went to the Alabama LSU game this last weekend. Hint, hint, Alabama won.
That was a subtle roll tide,
sorry, low blow. But it was not a great game though. But what was neat was even there, one of my relatives that comes to this Thanksgiving just happened to be working the game, and so to even get to catch up with her, it reminds me of what I love about Thanksgiving and the reason why it's a special holiday. And I can see why if you don't have that, sometimes maybe you're not as thankful. But for me, it's always made me very thankful for my roots, my heritage, having such a great family life. And I know that's not the same for everybody, but for me growing up, just a lot of positive people that love Jesus in my family. And so therefore the environment's pretty healthy and a lot of fun to be around. You know?
That's awesome. I'm assuming there's also delicious food.
Oh, there's
at this
food.
gathering.
Yeah, there's food. Yeah, absolutely.
Of course. I love that though, how you said it's like a mini family reunion where you're able to have that time to be thankful for the family that God has blessed you with. And like you said, you've had such a positive influence from them. That's such a neat moment for you. So for me, we started a new tradition with our daughter, and it's this thankful tree. And I try to get real crafty with it. We've got these tree and these branches.
So you do have Thanksgiving decorations then?
We do actually.
So
There's a Thanksgiving
Never even knew.
tree.
I think you made that up, by the way. But.
No, Pinterest made it up.
Okay,
I found it. I can't claim
okay.
it. And so what we do is every day we get a leaf and we add it to the tree and we say something that we're thankful for. And so by day 26, it gets real interesting, the things that we list out. But something that really has stuck out to me is that watching my daughter and myself and my husband list out the specific things that we're thankful for, and we allow it to even be guided by things that are going on in our life in that moment. Like, for instance, we had a plumbing issue, and so that day my daughter said, I'm really thankful for the plumber, like people who like to work with water and stuff. And so for me, it just kind of gives me this mindset of being thankful for the big things and for even those small things that we often get so busy with our daily lives that we forget to be thankful for. And so I love this season because we slow down. It's like you shared about your family, and with our thankful tree, we just stop and say, look at what the Lord has blessed us with.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the encouragement as we walk into the sermon and the stuff for tonight is sometimes we may presume that's what we do. And if we're not careful, you can breeze right through a season and or through a year and not be thankful. And even if you are a super thankful person in November, what we're about to walk through tonight is such a great reminder on being thankful all the time. And as Christians, how it can't just be limited to a certain time of the year.
Absolutely.
So,
Great
I look
point.
forward to discussing tonight and what he talked about Sunday.
Great point. So, like we said, the sermon title was Thankful. We focused on 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 14 through 24. And in that, it's listed out how we should have this thankful heart and the ways that we can be thankful in our everyday lives, and especially for us as believers. And so it goes to our life lesson that Pastor Michael gave us, and it said, to move forward and to get better in life, be thankful for what you have and what God has given you. Now, something that stood out to me in the life lesson was how he said the phrase of getting better. It's this action of something that we have to do. And I think we all can agree, we all have wanted to get better at something, or we've wanted someone else to have something better for themselves. Like I said, it requires this action. So, Pastor Bo, share with us, is there something you can reflect on where you wanted to get better at something, and maybe you succeeded in that, maybe you failed in that? What happened in that moment of trying to get better?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about where I failed, but I will talk about where I succeeded one time. No, there's been plenty of things that, you always set goals, try to do new things. There's plenty of things that I could list off as failures, but I'll give you one thing that I failed at a bunch until it's actually one of the most great things I'm most grateful for coming out of 2020 with all the extra time, and that is I've always had a pretty good devotional life when it comes to reading the Bible or, even praying for the most part. But the hardest thing for me is I'm not very much of a writer. And so last year and part of it's probably taking the time to write. It just takes time to sit around, think about what you want to put on paper and put it down. And one of the benefits of last year was a habit did form in my kind of my schedule to where I became much more of a journaler than I ever have been. And so for me, it's something that I always desired. And I've started many notebooks and failed at it. But what I'm so grateful for, I actually did this a few weeks back because I completed that notebook. It's a big notebook. I completed it from last year into the mid of this year. But I was so grateful to be able to look back and review both the great things last year that God did in my life, but also even seeing where I was challenged or the things I was feeling at certain points in time, and to be able to reflect back and go, oh man, God, you've really grown me in this area, or man, I've still got to work. I'm still working on my heart in this other area. So it kind of relates to the better theme, both and, because not only did I develop a skill set I value, but also internally I can see a lot of things in which I want to get better at, or perhaps I did get better at over the course of the last year and a half. So that was what I thought of.
That's a great example, in that even though you failed in the past, you didn't succeed the way you wanted to, you still wanted that, and so you went after. You still did that action of, okay, I'm going to try this again to get better, and then the fruit that came from it.
Yeah, I mean, it took a pandemic, but yes, I finally did it. It's like, it takes the world, crumbling around me to get me to journal. But no, I mean, it is interesting how if you keep those things on your radar, you never know when the right thing will hit for the habit to form, whether that be working out or eating right or spiritual habits, whatever it might be. It's really interesting for me that this was not something I started last year going, I'm going to journal more. I always had it on my radar.
Right.
But when that free time started, when we were all locked down, I used the term free time loosely because it didn't feel free, but there was definitely more time to do that. And so all of a sudden a habit forms, very neat.
That's a great example. So I have an example where I failed and I still haven't gotten better at it.
Oh, so
okay?
you're bringing your failure up.
So I'm going to show my failure. I say all the time, I'm going to get better at cooking. And it just doesn't happen. And when I was reflecting, I said, I think I finally figured out why. And it's because I don't try. I think I watch the cooking shows, I read about it, I look on Instagram at all the beautiful pictures of food out there that I want to do. But then I get in the kitchen and I'm like, I just don't really put the action forward. And so then I look at myself and I'm like, oh, you're still not the chef that you want to be, but it's because I don't do the action of trying to get better at cooking. And so I think there's a lot of ways that you could take that and apply that to our spiritual lives as well, things we want to get better at in our spiritual walks, but we don't do the action to be able to get there. And I see it on your face.
Yeah,
Pastor
I'm
Bo
never
is
going to
saying,
get there. I'm never going to get there. So I don't know if I want to compare that to my spiritual life because
with cooking?
it's a skill set I'll never have. So, but that's beside the point.
I thought you were looking at me saying, well, remind me never to go to your house to eat.
No, I already know you well, Audra. That was not going to happen anyway. No, but I did not know that was a desire though. So that's interesting because,
it's a desire,
yeah.
but I put no action for it, so I'm
Yeah.
not going to get better at it. And so that kind of goes into what Pastor Michael said back to that life lesson about getting better in life. To move forward, we have to be thankful for what God's given us and what he's blessed us with. And so we have to do the work and realize and recognize all the great things that he's done and that he is doing in our lives, even when it doesn't seem that great. I think that's one of the hardest things that we're going to unpack here in a second, of how we can get better even when nothing around us seems to be getting better, how to stay inspired. So the first thing that Pastor Michael took from Scripture is this idea of rejoicing always. So immediately when he said this, I was like, well, that's the opposite of negative Nancy and negative Ned. Have you ever met a negative Nancy or a negative Ned?
I mean, yes.
Maybe, yeah. I think we all have had moments where we've been around a negative Nancy and negative Ned where they're just always something wrong. It's always, this is not right. This is not how it should be. And instead, we should be someone who says, okay, I'm going to choose to rejoice always, even when it's really hard and even when it doesn't make sense. And so that's how Pastor Michael led into an encourager. He laid out that an encourager is someone who brings strength. An encourager helps practice patience in our lives, and an encourager wants our good. So I started reflecting and thinking, okay, an encourager is someone you want to be around. An encourager is someone that helps you be better. Who's an encourager in your life, and what are some of the tangible things they did that helped you be better in your walk?
Well, what I would say is this. For me, as I thought about this question, as I hear you even talking about it, I thought about people. We've talked some about encouragers. You may have that in a second. But I also thought about people who are just naturally positive when you encounter them.
Yeah.
So this is not for me. As I think about the people you're asking me about, I don't necessarily, when it says rejoice always, think about the people that uplift me through encouraging words, although they'll have them. I think about those people that when you just encounter them, they're rejoicing. You know what I'm saying? And we all probably have days where we're that person for somebody and days where we don't.
Right.
Even the most positive people, sometimes, if they were truly honest, they're probably faking it through it to make it,
Yeah.
But I do think about those people. Well, I'll give you an example. Today, Pastor and I were sitting out on the patio, and we encountered some kids, and when you said, hey, how's your day going? One of the kids says, I'm tired. And I think it's a kid response, it's very
Right.
natural, but I'm going, that is the opposite of the person that, they might be tired, but they're thinking about how God has brought them through and given them the energy for the day, So, it's late for us. We've been here all day. I'm tired too, but if I walk around even on this stream tonight going, oh,
Right.
I've got to be here, right? Instead, rejoicing means that we take delight and we are thankful for the opportunities God has given. So for the example of being here tonight, instead of looking at, man, I've got to be here late tonight, instead it's, man, I'm so grateful that we get to do this together.
Absolutely.
And that perspective then makes you a rejoicer. And I can think of a number of people. I don't have time to list, nor do I want to spell them out, especially those in the church. But I can think of, man, on Sundays, on Wednesdays, people that I encounter that whether or not they say anything encouraging to me, their spirit about their life, about being in God's house, etc., definitely lifts me up when I see them.
Yeah, I love the emphasis that you put on, maybe it's not like a tangible thing that they always say or they always point you to, but it's the spirit. It's what is just the aroma of Christ that's coming from them, of just the, okay, I'm choosing to rejoice. I'm choosing to be glad and grateful for what the Lord has given me, for being here in this moment with you. And those are the people that make you feel better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And they do encourage you, so I don't want to go, Pastor obviously talking about encouragement. They do encourage you.
Right.
But sometimes I think of encouragers sometimes as they can be the people that are the subtle people that speak into your life, and they may not be rejoicing, but they can speak into your life. That's kind of where I differentiate the two a little bit in my mind. When they write rejoice always, I think it's a person that, man, no matter the darkest point, they've got to be grateful and see what God's doing in that moment so that they might rejoice in something, even if it's that small in their life, you know.
I love it too when we think about it, us as believers, and this kind of goes into the next question of not only do we need people to rejoice always around us, but how we can also be that person, whether it is the subtle, just I'm going to rejoice and be glad and have that quick moment with you, or it is the encourager who says, okay, let me remind you of God's truth in this moment. Let me remind you that we are for your good and things like that. So with that, rejoicing always, being an encourager, can we base it on emotion, or does it have to be a mindset for us as believers to live out?
Well, I think it can. Obviously, I would say no, don't base it on emotion, but emotion plays into it. And what I would say is, like, I think the key to rejoicing always is, no matter where you fall on an emotional day, is to be aware of, do you externally praise God in the way that you need to? And so you may not have the greatest day or be the happiest person you can be or anything like that. But if you're grateful and you realize what God's done for you, then are you aware of how externally you're showing that? So I know a lot of people that are in Christ that, man, they walk around sometimes and they can't help but show how they feel. Right? And unfortunately, what that does is, for their life, but also the people around them, it brings everything down. And I believe when we're asked to rejoice always, it's just as much about the external as is the internal. You've got to start with the internal. You've got to be grateful and recognize what God's done. But if you don't allow it to translate, this is where some of the emotion stuff does come in. If you don't allow it to uplift your emotions and help you show it on the outside, then you may never truly experience what God has meant for you to experience, which is, A, I think you will feel better, but then 2, the people around you, I think you'll feel a different atmosphere around you if you don't walk around that way. You know, it all we affect one another in that sense.
Absolutely. I love that you were able to differentiate that sometimes we have the moments where we have to start off saying, okay, I'm choosing this mindset, but how it can eventually lead us into actually feeling that emotion. I think so often, when I first thought of this question, started thinking in my own life, I said, oh, well, it's always mindset. You just got to work through the emotions and just ignore them. But like what you just said is, you're doing a discredit to your faith journey in the fact of you allow it to be a moment where, okay, I have this emotion, I got to work through it. And I'm going to choose this mindset of saying, I'm going to rejoice. And in that, allowing the Lord to refine you, to change you, and how that does affect those around you as well.
I say this for you if you're like me. I'm a pretty even kill person. And so I have to recognize that, like, sometimes if I'm not careful, I may feel great on the inside and still may not show people on the outside. I can walk through the office, walk through the school here around the kids, or through my own life in my home. And if I'm not careful, I may look okay. I may not frown at you. I may not look like I'm mad, but I may also not show the joy that I'm intending to show unless I choose to smile. Or unless I choose to interact in some way that's uplifting, unless I choose to. And so, you've got to think about these things. I think as we talk about practice, The practice is, are you representing what's on the inside? And if what's on the inside, man, needs to be encouraged, et cetera, you got to work on that first. You can't fake it.
Right.
Right. But then if what's on the inside is positive, you might be a person, whether you recognize it or not, that when you go around the outside, you don't show it. And that's just as much, I think, about what's being written here is we must be people that uplift, encourage, rejoice. That's part of being in the body of Christ is how we help one another.
Absolutely. And like you just said, show it because of the impact that that can make, not only for believers around us, but honestly for the gospel that we're going to talk about a little bit of how that's actually a way by how we demonstrate the joy that we feel in our hearts for the Lord on the days where we feel it and on the days where we have to muster it up. Those moments can be an opportunity to share his love with others around us that he brings in our path. Well, going on with the rejoicing always, we go into the next one, which is pray continually. And this one's kind of like well, yeah, absolutely. But when you start thinking about praying continually, that's something that we should do. And we all would say, yes, check, easy. But that's not easy, though. Right, I mean, that's one of those practices that, if we're all honest and transparent, is one that we struggle with. Pastor Michael said this really great moment where he said that prayer is the opposite of talking to everyone else, and instead is that moment where we say, Lord, I'm coming to you first, and you are always going to be the first person I talk to and the one that I talk to the most about. And so with that, I just got to say, I got to ask, why is it that we go to prayer last? Why is it not the first thing? Why do we go to those outsiders first?
Well, to clarify, I do think people that are naturally gifted in the prayer gift do go there first.
Yes,
I know people who are naturally wired to go there. So if you're that person watching tonight, excuse us for a second because you've been gifted. We're grateful for you.
Absolutely.
But you've been gifted as a prayer warrior. For the other percentage of Christians that aren't gifted that way, I just think there's a couple of reasons, I think. One is some people really don't know how to pray or they feel intimidated talking with God. The second reason is I do think that if we're truly honest, it's a lot harder sometimes to talk to God because it's not this audible conversation all the time. I have no audible conversation with God. I've not heard God speak in a voice. I know some people may say they have at certain moments, but that's not happening in my life. And then third, I think if we were real honest too, I think we know the power of prayer, but perhaps because miracles really only happen certain points in human history. Right. We may not recognize how God's answering, but a lot of times it may not be in the water to wine type miracle moments. Right. And so therefore, we may not truly believe there's power, even though we know there's power in prayer. We may not truly believe that. There may seem like there's more progress when we get our friends, our family, maybe even wise people that are Christians that give us good advice. When we get them involved first, it may seem to be more help than prayer, even though we would never say that, and we know that's not true,
Right.
So that's some of the things I think of.
I think you are spot on when you said we'll go to friends and even wise people that are in our church, that people we've known throughout our faith journey. We typically go to them first because of that audible voice, and then two, just that interaction. And so it just feels a little bit more natural because it's something we do every single day. We talk to people every single day, whether it's on the phone, texting, in person. We're talking to people. And I think what is so key is that we have to remember when we begin to set that praying continually in our lives, that habit in our lives, it will become more natural for us to go to the Lord. It will become like those prayer warriors who are gifted, which, like you said, we're so thankful that there are people who this is just their natural tendency that they go to the Lord first. But for the rest of us who may struggle with that, realizing, okay, I may not hear him in the fact of like I do on the phone or face to face with someone, but he is listening. He has the answer already. I just have to be willing to say, Lord, I'm going to continually talk to you to develop that natural conversation, that natural flow. You get what I'm saying when I say that?
And it also takes like the time to stop. Like the other problem is, I mean, we're all wired to go, and so a phone call we may be able to do while we're driving, whatever. We don't think of prayer that way. We don't
Absolutely,
think
yeah.
that while we're driving. I mean, for the most part, we don't think, oh, while I'm driving from point A to point B, I could pray and talk to God, or perhaps instead of making this call in my office, I need to pause and talk to God in my office, et cetera, et cetera. And so, because we consider talking to people as action, we never stop. We don't realize that we could just replace that, The other thing, too, is I do think, going back to point number one, the more we can recognize and rejoice in how God has answered our prayers, the more we can see the progress in prayer being a solution for our lives, we probably would be more motivated. Because I do know the people that have seen God radically answer prayers, I mean, obviously that's the first place they go because they've seen God do it time and time again.
Absolutely. I think about our prayer team that lifts up the prayer requests that are sent in here, and we as a staff being a part of that. And when we get those praise reports of those where we've seen the Lord answer things, it jazzes me up to be like, look at how the Lord provided, look at what he did. And so you're right, it does inspire us when we rejoice always sharing those answered prayers. It does make us say, hey, this is the best option for me to go to. This is the best action step that I can do by praying continually in my walk. That's a great reminder. So share real quick about a time maybe in your own life or maybe in scripture that really stands out to you where prayer was the first step for that person, where they said, I'm going to pray continually about this. And how does it impact your faith journey?
Yeah, so I'll just go back to the first example. This whole season of pandemic, et cetera, has brought me to my knees in prayer. I mean, really the health of our world, our country, but not only our health, but for the church, seeing the mission of the church continue in the midst of all this, has really brought me into a daily, first fruit. Before I talk about restrictions or complain about whatever or get into the politics of COVID or try to battle with people over what should be and what shouldn't be and all those dead-end thoughts that we all go through, it's really been prayer, going to God first and asking him to be healer, that has helped kind of set me on pace during this whole last year and a half. And so that's one example to where there's no choice. When I saw that coming, there was no choice but to pray. So you talk about the first step was to pray, and I've seen that God answer that. And yes, it's not exactly how. I'm still wrestling with God on exactly what the outcome of all this is. Right? We all have that question. But it has helped me know he's still in charge. He has reminded me that on a daily basis, so that I haven't lost hope in the midst of this.
Right.
And so
I love how you shared that it allowed you to turn towards the Lord. That you, instead of looking at this moment and getting angry or bitter or anything like that, you decided to say, okay, Lord, this makes no sense. I'm coming to you first because everything around me is changing 24/7, but you're not changing. And me being able to talk to you about this is not going to change. And so I think that is going to be so, I wish we were past all of this at this point, but what a great habit, what a great spiritual warfare item you have in your belt to be able to say, prayer is my number one go-to now before I start my day, before I get going on anything, because of you taking the time, the action to say, I'm going to get better at this so I can be closer to you, Lord.
Yeah, and specifically with this season, I would say I've experienced the opposite. I've experienced where I just want to talk about politics, restrictions, COVID, et cetera, and what that makes me feel like, no matter what my opinions on it are. I've also experienced where perhaps we want to talk about medicines, procedures, doctors, like the health of it all, instead of trusting in the great physician to be over it all, right?
Yeah.
Or when it comes to the end, or maybe you're in the camp where you just kind of said, I don't care about any of it, right? And you fail to pray for this in our world. You fail to show compassion and ask God to heal, etc. Because just as I expressed earlier about losing a family member to it, when those losses happen, it's real. Right. It's significant, and perhaps you've become callous to the fact that this is something significant, whether your little world was impacted huge or not. regardless of which side you fall on, if prayer and God are not the first place you fall on your knees to, you're missing out on the Christian experience. You're missing out on why it was written to pray continually. And I would challenge you that if you can't do it there, I challenge that it might not be possible to do it in other places, other areas that are a lot harder to see than a worldwide something going on.
Right. No, I think that's such a great point to remember that the first step for us to face anything like we've been talking about with COVID, whatever personal issue you may be having in your own world, the first step is to get on your knees and pray to the Creator, to the God who is the only one that can actually do anything. You know what I mean? It goes back to when we go to those who are around us who may give us a great word of encouragement and who may give us great insight, but at the end of the day, the only thing that can change anything is Jesus. He's the only one, so why wouldn't we go to him first and do that prayer continually throughout our day? So this goes into our third point where we talk about giving thanks, kind of going back to the beginning of the thankful. Pastor Michael shared, though, that he kind of adds something in his own mind when he reads this section of Scripture, and I thought it was really interesting how he said, as he reads this, everything he says he adds right now. You know, we need to rejoice always, and we need to rejoice right now. We need to pray continually. We need to pray right now. And then giving thanks right now. Why is there so much power when we give thanks right now in the moment that God's given us?
Well, and I take this as a whole nother level because it's one thing to smile and rejoice for what God's doing. It's another thing to give God thanks for what he's doing. It does tie into both concepts, to rejoice and to pray, because if we're not careful, like just as I just talked about prayer, right? It's a lot of God, please do. God,
Right.
do this, do that. And giving thanks to God is all about a sacrificial offering in the sense of, you know, recognizing God verbally, like, God, I thank you for doing X, Y, or Z in my life. And there's something about the power of saying thank you, right? We all know this as human beings. Like, if you, without asking, without prompting, get thanked for doing something, you know, it's nice.
It feels
Like,
awesome.
especially when you do it and you're not even thinking about it. Like, I just want to
Yeah.
help this person, right? I don't need the thank you. And then
Right.
somebody chooses to thank you. It's awesome. And so the God doesn't need our thanks. He really doesn't. He does it out of the outflowing of his love for his kids. But the power in giving thanks is the recognition of God, first and foremost for our hearts, but then also we know for the sake of the gospel, when those around us hear us give God thanks for this, all of a sudden God's on display. It's not us. It's not us overcoming something or us miraculously experiencing something. Instead, it's that God did it in our lives.
Yeah. I think what stands out to me from what you just shared was how we have the opportunity to say thank you to the Creator Almighty. And I think about, too, what you said. When someone says thank you to you, it feels really good. I mean, that's why we look at our kids and we try to teach them, okay, now say thank you. The other day with my daughter, we're talking through something, and she goes, oh, thank you, Mama. And I literally was like, it finally clicked. But I could also see on her face that she meant it, that she really meant thank you. And you're right. It just warmed my heart to be like, oh, she's appreciative of what just happened. And so it's what you said. Why on earth do we not thank the Lord for everything he's given us, even when the moment's hard, when it's challenging, because there are blessings we can look to and give him thanks for. And so for me, something else that stood out when I thought about this question is we have to give thanks right now because we don't know what's coming up ahead. We're not guaranteed that tomorrow we're going to have the opportunity to thank the Lord just because we're in a bad mood today. You know, sometimes I think we go, oh, I'm having a bad day. Lord, I'll get back to it tomorrow and I'll be thankful then. You're not guaranteed that's going to happen. So in that moment, no matter how difficult it is, there is something, you have breath in your lungs. Give thanks.
Yeah, and our memories are short. I mean, the other reality is like, you know, how many times have you meant to send that thank you card for that present somebody gave you or for inviting you to that thing and it just never happens, right?
Absolutely.
And so the reality is if you don't stop and thank God when it comes on your heart, whether that be verbally, just out loud, whether that be in front of somebody, whether that be through journaling or whether that just be in the privacy of your own heart, if you don't stop to thank God in that moment, I guarantee you, you're probably not going to remember it.
Yeah,
There's
you're
a
gonna
good
miss out.
likelihood. I'm not saying it never happens, but there's a good likelihood you're not going to remember it.
Absolutely. And in that moment, it's just like what I shared about with my daughter when she said thank you to me, and it just made me feel so wonderful. It was a connection with her. So think about when we give thanks to God, the connection that will form with him because of his great love for us and our grateful humbleness that we should feel towards him. And like you said, we get caught up in our days and we forget about it. He deserves that time. He deserves that in that moment right then to get that thanks from us. And so all of this kind of goes back to something you shared at the very beginning of that. It's not just the month of November and Thanksgiving that we should be thankful. These should be things that we do as Christians every single day, rejoicing always, praying continually, giving thanks. So why should we do that though? Like, how does it affect the kingdom when we do that?
Well, we've mentioned a few, but we'll recap some. So, it impacts your life. It's going to help you in your own abilities to recognize how good your life is, whatever that might be. Even if there's significant challenges, you're going to be able to recognize it. It's going to improve your mood. It just
Absolutely,
is.
yep.
I'm not saying you're going to walk around with a smile on your face, but you're just going to feel a little lighter if you can see the goodness of God. And then on top of that, the people around you, you will feel a better atmosphere. If you're the person that you go, man, people really don't seem to like it when I'm around, or they seem to scatter, maybe you're not that self-aware. Maybe you don't know. I promise you that if you'll practice these things, you'll have more people around you, and people will want to be in your presence more. They'll want to spend time with you because you're a person that uplifts them and encourages them. And then the most important thing among all that is God's name is made known, so people know more about God, and especially when it comes to, obviously there's a church environment, but especially when it comes to when we encounter the lost world out there, they have got to see that we're different. They've got to see that there's some hope, and they've got to see that our God, yes, we're all messes, we mess up, but our God is so much greater, and he's worthy. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll give it back to you, is just let it not be said of Christians that we go throughout November celebrating a holiday that we don't practice. To eat all the food, and even for me, have the family and do the thing, but never truly really stop to reflect and be grateful. Yes, on a daily basis, but if you have a trouble with the daily right now, I just challenge you, like tonight, tomorrow, sometime this month, stop and re-center yourself in gratitude, in rejoicing and asking God to, and giving him thanks, because the worst thing we could do is celebrate a holiday in name but never truly practice it.
I love that. I love that, the practical step of going tonight and saying, I'm going to be thankful. I'm going to talk to you, Lord, about the blessings that you've given me, how amazing you are, and I'm going to rejoice no matter what I'm feeling. I'm going to choose the joy in my heart to take over any other negative emotion. That way I can focus on your goodness, Lord, because he is for our good, and therefore he deserves the praise and the glory and honor. And I love, too, how when we do all these things, not only will it better our lives, but it'll better the lives around us, whether it's in the church or outside in the world, in our communities, in our homes. We will be the light of Christ. We really will stand out and make an impact for the gospel.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for discussing this with me tonight. Thank you for joining us as well. This Sunday, we're going to be on campus at 9 a.m. with groups. We have groups for every age group. So come, the whole family can come join us in our word and the community that we're developing every Sunday. And then at 10:30, we're going to have our worship service, and we're going to continue on in our series, Better. I'm excited to see what Pastor Michael brings, what we hear about, and how we can continue to be better at what God has called us to. So again, 9 a.m. groups on campus, 10:30 we'll have worship on campus and online. We can't wait to see you then.